Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is, of course, the She Talks podcast featuring Gail Burks. On this episode, we discuss diversity and inclusion, and it's actually a special episode because there was just so much to cover, so much to talk about that we actually broke it up into two parts. So this is part one. We're going to jump right in. And one of the ones that jumped out at us for obvious reasons was the headline says that change is afoot at Nike. And, okay, everything that's going on, I kind of had an idea of what it was, but, said let's go ahead and click it and see. And, I made the comment to you right before we started, we hopped on here that, the content baffled me because it's 2020, and what the article is about is saying how now is when these corporations, and again that Nike, and just a couple of the quotes here before I dive in, that the Nike CEO said that they've been restructuring the company's leadership, and said earlier this year that Nike has a disconnect on race issues that needs to change. And again, it's like it's 2020.
My!
And you know what, Gail? You look at the their target audience. I would have thought that they would have been more in tune with what they're trying to get in tune with now.
Well, I mean, Steve, it goes back to what we talked about before. Business and industry is run by capitalists. It is an economic thing. And as long as the numbers are showing, nothing else really is going to matter. And, unless there is a scream, that says something is not right, and it comes from several different directions, that's the only time you're going to get a capitalist's attention, because at that point they realize, hey, this could affect my bottom line. And, first and foremost, Nike is always going to be in the forefront of this conversation, because these guys and gals, they are trailblazers. When you look at what they did with Colin Kaepernick, when he was a dark horse for the NFL, and a thorn in their side, and Nike took that in and made a multi-billion-dollar initiative with it. They made money with it, so did Mr. Kaepernick. But, they are mavericks when it comes to this. But that's the external, and that's the situation I see when I get the call to come in, is when that internal effort in managing diverse workforce and day to day doesn't match the external message that's being shared. And that's when you have the problems. And then you get groups like Black Lives Matter, or the LGBT, or the Me Too movement. That's when that internal message doesn't match up to the external message that we all hear every day in the advertising. So, I think that business and industry has got to take a better look, and the reactive in 2020 should not be part of the strategy of business and industry. I say that with all the passion I can muster. This division, we have a diversity and inclusion division at CMA Enterprise, and for 8 years it was quiet. And then 4 years ago, it started to get active again, because things were starting to happen, and little things were starting to bud in corporate America and business and industry and in government, that people needed to really take heart to. And so, that resurrected that division again. But it happens in all facets of an organization. And a lot of it has to do with unchecked behavior. And you and I are both spiritual people, and the first thing I always say to people when I do these kinds of, whether they're coaching, whether they're training, whether it's building initiatives, um, shall we do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves? Does anybody disagree with me on that? And
I was going to say, what ends up happening with that is that we all say it, and then in that moment, I say I try to, live by that. But a lot of people in that moment will do the exact opposite.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. And a lot of people need to be re-educated on the equal employment opportunity, anti-harassment laws, not guidelines, laws that apply. Those in leadership need to understand that when you take on a role called supervisor, manager, team lead, crew leader, executive, board of director, you are probably more inclined to be held accountable if something goes wrong that has to do with those EEO laws. And I find more often than not, leaders in organizations, regardless of the category, have no clue as to what EEO laws are, let alone what they mean if something goes wrong. Well, I can tell you, you don't want to be on the wrong side of an EEO audit. That's your job. That's your reputation. Those are customers lost to never be regained. Because word does get out. Once an EEO audit is done, it becomes public record.
I was going to say, once you have that reputation of, and that's what it is, right? A reputation comes from that one mishap, that one senior level employee that, never really fit your values, but you still allowed them to continue to work there. And that one mishap by that one individual that never really fit your values ends up slapping that reputation on you. Right. And that's all it takes.
Right. It's when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it is not just a Black thing. It just so happens that the Black community ends up more often than not taking the lead on these kinds of situations. I don't want to use the cliche of that's how it's always been, but it just seems to be that we tend to mobilize and verbalize, having been historically an underheard community. And when we are in distress, we mobilize in that way. But what I've also seen, as you've probably noticed in this Black Lives Matter initiative, that the Native American Indians have also enjoined themselves in this Black Lives Matter. Hispanics have enjoined themselves in this Black Lives Matter. LGBTQ plus have enjoined themselves in this Black Lives Matter. And it has become more of a people matter. Now, I too follow, just because of the nature of my business, because it helps me understand trends. I follow some of the recruitment apps that are out there. And I too have seen a lot of these requests for diversity and inclusion leadership and, whatever they want to call it in their organization culture. But I also say that don't let that just be a Black position.
Right. And that's where I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where I feel everybody tends to go.
Right.
It's like, for diversity and inclusion, we need to get and like Nike, they have a black woman. To
Right.
me, and this is me being, a little opinionated on that, but it seems very cliche. It seems very obvious. Um, and again, this is my opinion. To me, it feels like if you have to hire a diversity and inclusion person, it's kind of like a manners thing, right? Like it's something
Right.
you shouldn't at these stages of life of business, you shouldn't have to bring somebody in to show you proper like etiquette and manners and things like that. That's you
Yeah.
learned it. It's inherited. It's part of your fabric.
Right.
Then you bring in somebody to I. It feels
Right.
wrong for me.
Yeah. And the other side of that too, because why not bring someone in of color as a COO or a CFO, where you are going to truly, truly impact the core business, or that person becomes the chief executive human resource officer or the chief people officer, um, because that and what is the direct reporting line of that person? If that person is going to make an impact in the organization, then that person needs to report directly either to the board of directors or the CEO and or president of the company. Don't bury them down the line. So that tells you how, and I don't know the situation with Nike, but that tells you where the level of degree of importance is for the company to make those changes that need to happen and give that person the resources that they need to do so. Because oftentimes that's a one person shop.
I was
And
just gonna say
yeah,
I was just going to say that it's and what sounds or what feels wrong to me in a sense is the title. Okay,
right,
so
right,
I'm glad you followed up what I had said with what you said, because it shouldn't be that you're bringing somebody in or you're elevating somebody to a diversity and whatever position. It should be
right,
that that person has the qualifications and should have been recognized beforehand to have the qualifications to be that CFO, to be a CEO, to be a vice president of XYZ. And
right,
from there, it's a cultural thing. It's okay. So you have a person like that in that position because of their credentials,
exactly.
and I it just it's not that everybody follows suit in that sense, but you're setting the example from the top,
Right.
and again, you bring in somebody with that title, and then you don't give them the proper support, then what are you doing? You're just making it, again, my opinion, it feels like a mockery of the situation. Like,
Well, it becomes window dressing.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it becomes window dressing. I sat on a corporate board for over 24 years before we
Hmm.
sold the company.
Yeah, so you speak from I mean, this is the best person to have this
Yeah,
conversation with.
I speak from the highest levels of business and industry. I was 30 years old. No, I'm sorry. I take that back. I was 34 years old, not too far off, when I got my board appointment. But I was already a force to be reckoned with out here in the entrepreneurship world. And so as I grew up and matured, I grew up in that corporate boardroom. And one of the things, and I was the only African American, I was the only woman, but I was heard because I brought more, and they gave me, the community committee that what they do. But not realizing at that time that was probably one of the most important committees when it came to protecting the image of the organization.
Gotcha.
You mess that one up, you got problems, you got image problems. So I protected that with a passion, but also became a formidable player on the bank's audit committee and the oversight committee when we had to do some turnaround. uh, uh, activities. So my skill sets came out when they were best needed, when it came to negotiating and managing conflict and crisis with some of our overseers, if you will. um, my mediation skills came out. So, the company hat, CEO hat, was able to assist in that boardroom, and my colleagues recognized the value of what I brought to the table, to that boardroom, not only helping us to right size our financial situation, but to also be that go-to board member to advocate for that level playing field and that fairness in the human resource side, because I was able to bring different kinds of expectations that many of my colleagues who were financial and legal people did not see or have a patience for. But that was my core expertise. So being able to cross those competency lines is something that you need to be able to see and have with your diverse workforce, and for organizations who are looking to build it, you've got to have it at the top. It's got to sit at the top. And like I said, sitting in the boardroom, if you look at me, I'm African American, I'm female. At that time, I was under 30. That was before they were doing the 40 under 40s or 30 under 30. By the time I got to 40, by the time they started doing that, I was past 40. But nonetheless, that whole diversity and inclusion became nullified when the value of the individual was recognized. And I say that because those companies that get it see beyond just the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that goes, going back to the Nike situation, I am hoping that becomes part of that journey that they have started by bringing in that diversity and inclusion officer. Because at some point in time, they end up becoming part of the problem, because they work for the company and they are driven by the desires of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so the influence that they have ends up getting diluted. And I think that's why I have stayed as an independent from that standpoint, because my influence is not diluted. I'm brought in as the hired gun to settle that dust, settle the dust storms that exist within the organization.
I want to go back to the Nike and the Kaepernick ad for a second, because this is a prime example of what gets talked about all the time, which is, okay, it's great for these companies to put out these statements, to pledge X amount of money, because you need the money to do
Right.
things and all that. So all that's great. But here's my bigger point. So Nike is doing that now, right? That they got the that person in that position, XYZ. That Kaepernick ad was about 2 years ago. I pulled up, before you mentioned it, I thought of that Nike ad, of that Kaepernick ad, and I started pulling up, the numbers on it. And Nike surged as much as 9.2% in early U.S. trading after its second quarter results. Blah, 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 but after that ad, right?
Right.
So you can do the ads, you can put out the statements, you can create these cool hashtags that are thought provoking and everything else. But until you actually do something about it, what are you really doing? You're going with, you get what I'm trying to get at.
Well, and a lot of times you have to be careful what you ask for. And again, it goes back to the fact that the opportunity was there to boost the brand. Controversy sells tickets. It does. And what more controversial individual could you possibly bring into the fold than Colin Kaepernick at the time?
Yeah.
And now he's truly a hero because time has shown that his stance was the right one. So now it's fashionable to take a knee. But the other side of that is when you take those maverick moves, you've got to know that sooner or later, someone is going to come in and going to ask to see and walk through your laundry room.
Yep.
And if you don't have your laundry room and the baskets in order in your laundry room, then that becomes an image problem for you. I'll never forget years ago, I had done a lot of work in the diverse supplier universe. I was very active there. And I did some work for one of the corporations down here. And I was really surprised about the assignment because they were saying we need to have you come in and help us with our supplier diversity program. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. We'll do that. Piece of cake. That's like walk, down Main Street with my eyes closed and I know which street to turn on. But as we started moving through the conversation, I realized that they had no program at all. But what they were doing was they'd go to these trade shows or they'd show up at these events and someone had printed up brochures, but there was nothing behind it. And they wanted me to come in and help them because someone had called them out on not having a valid program. And it ended up being someone that they in turn were trying to do business with.
Affecting the bottom line.
And well, no, it's the kind of business that it was. It allows them to put their business into other businesses. And that potential client was asking them about their supply diversity program.
Well, and that's what I mean. Like, it would have affected the bottom line because it would have affected them getting that partnership. So exactly. That's when it's like, oh, wait, this potential partnership might blow up because we don't have what we say we have. We don't have that foundation that we say we have. So then Gail to the rescue. And again, what was that aha moment for them?
Yeah, it's economics. It goes back to economics, and that's what I tell people. This, for those inside organizations who are advocating disparate discrimination, in other words, the subtle discrimination or even the overt discrimination. And it doesn't matter if it's black, white, male, female, gender based, lifestyle based, age based, whatever it is, you have got to understand that you're putting an expiration date on yourself. You are, because the minute the organization finds the reason behind why their revenue increase is being blocked, or why their image is being tainted, or why they can't get good candidates to come and work for them because you're out of there. You're gone. You are going to be a piece of collateral that is expendable, and you will be gone because they can no longer afford the lawsuits, the image, uh, damage, and the damages to when you look at what happened with Wells Fargo and their desire to be the best, to be on top, to get the numbers, and the way they pushed their people, the debacle that occurred. They got what was called a consent decree. People might be saying, well, what does that have to do with diversity and inclusion? What has everything to do with diversity and inclusion? You get those businesses that may be in underserved areas, and you get them loans, or you put these houses on the books that are in underserved areas where the people can't pay for the houses. Or you get older clients, and if you've got to make your budget for cross selling services for their accounts. People were finding ghost accounts and so heads rolled on that one. People lost jobs on that one. Nobody that I know of has gone to jail yet, but there needs to really be some, this was criminal. So understand that the diversity and inclusion is not just a black and white conversation, but it is all about economics, and that is the running thread through it all.
I was gonna say I was so taken aback by that point you just made, because yeah, I was like, I imagine some of our listeners, when you mentioned that, I was like, okay, I know Gail's going somewhere with this, but where's it going to tie into the diversity and inclusion? And then you said that, and it's like, it's again, it's that aha moment. Like, you're absolutely right, because
right.
They're to get those numbers. Who are they going to target?
Yeah.
And so it affects again, yeah, the diversity and inclusion side of it, because they were going to affect the black and brown population, because they're in a way, it's like easy pickings. You need it. I need my numbers. I know you can't afford it. You're not going to be able to maintain it. But as long as I get my numbers, you're the easy ones to kind of, go over. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So, there are a lot of games that happen. I've seen it in the diversity and inclusion, and as going back to being a corporate director, if you look at the numbers of African Americans and Black women who sit as corporate directors, the numbers are few and far between.
Oh, for sure.
And those who are entrepreneurs are even less, because they tend to want to go for those who sit or have sat immediately in corporate, not realizing that there's a worldliness when it comes to those of us who sit in entrepreneurship and the experience of running a company and managing other companies. So there are a lot of conversations that happen when you talk about diversity and inclusion. It is not just black and white. It is not. And the insight that the insight that you need to have when you want to get into a conversation about it. I talk with some of my colleagues all the time when it comes to helping people to manage through this type of conversation now. And you really have to be in tune with who you are, where you're coming from, where you are here in the present, and where you see yourself going. It is in order to bring others along with you. And if they're not ready, that's a whole different conversation and could be potentially a whole other fight.
Oh, yeah.
And it really doesn't have to be a fight. But it is meeting people where they are. And I think that there are groups of people here in America that are just now catching up, and they're catching up because of thank you to the internet, thank you to people videoing everything now and posting it out there so that everybody can see. And it's not that this stuff just started happening, it's now that it is being recorded and posted.
I was just gonna say it's you have all these people that are like, oh, this acting and feeling like this is something new. No, it's just
Yeah.
the technology is new, and all the cameras everywhere are new.
Right.
This has
You have
been going
cameras
on
everywhere, videos everywhere.
you know what? You just reminded me of a point I was going to make earlier with I think right before we got on here. Yeah, it was before we got on here about those times. Okay, so a lot of the CEOs and the individuals running these companies are from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. When a lot of that was normalized,
Right.
and you know you say something like that, and it kind of like again it takes you aback a bit because John Lewis just passed away over the weekend, and I forgot where I saw it or where I heard it, but that Emmett Till was I think a year younger than him. So to think that he could still, like he could have been still around right now, we like to pretend like that was so long ago and we're so far removed from that, and this country's not. And just one more point real quick on that. Um, again, we try not to get political on here, but you know,
Can't
um,
help yourself.
we can't sometimes because the conversation we're having it's so I'll read this I'll read this tweet, and you can already imagine who it's from. um I am happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low income housing built in your neighborhood. Your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down. I have rescinded the Obama Biden AFFH rule. Enjoy. Like, what? Like, did he really just put that? Like, and again, it speaks to that, we like to pretend like we're so far removed, and that
Right.
right there is what a lot I've found that a lot of people have had an issue in understanding or taking in, which that right there is the systemic racism that like I don't know. I mean, I know why. There's a lot of ignorance involved there, but I find a lot of people have such a hard time understanding what the systemic racism is and what those
Yeah.
inequalities are, and that's
Yeah.
it right there. That tweet is it right there.
That's the perception. I mean, it's like I try to read the news captions every day, and locally, nationally, and in the world. And there was one that broke my heart today, and it was a woman who lived in Coral Springs, which is a suburb, was murdered as she was trying to flee a bad relationship. And it was a murder of a domestic violence nature, because she was trying to flee that kind of situation. And now, unfortunately, but fortunately, she is safe, but she lost her life doing it. And that wasn't because of low income housing. Coral Springs is a nice little suburb here in South Florida. So it's again, perception becomes people's reality. But then the other side of that, and again, going back to this whole diversity and inclusion, you get exclusion when you have limited exposure to other lifestyles, people, quality of life, environments. That's when you have the conversations that need to be had regarding this topic. And we all know that everybody doesn't come from the same background, but we're also not teaching the same thing in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have the same type of challenges everywhere with all groups, regardless of the category. You have the same challenges. But the difference is, and what people are arguing and fighting for, is that there are some groups more so than others that have the access to the influence and the resources to succeed. That's where the argument and the debate continues. Equal access, and the group that doesn't want to give up that access is saying, but if I give up my access, I dilute my power. So it is about control. It is about power and the willingness or unwillingness to share it. That's what this is all about.
It
It's
is. Yeah.
economics, power, and control.